Hi everyone, this is Mr. Brissett, and I'm going to present to you guys the proposed trip to Europe, the LFMSS Grand Tour in 2021 during spring break. Every field trip has to have an educational rationale, and that is the rationale for the trip. You guys can read that over. I have a few of my favorite travel quotes here, and I'm just going to read this one. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And I think that's one of the really important reasons that we travel. The other reason that we travel, the other three reasons I always tell my groups is that we travel for education, we travel for camaraderie, and we travel for joy. Okay, let's take a look at the proposed itinerary. On Wednesday, March 10th, we will fly to Europe. And of course, your seat on the plane will look just like that. The flight to Europe is about 9.5 hours. It's overnight, so we end up arriving in Frankfurt in the morning, and our private coach bus will pick us up and take us to nearby Cologne, Germany. And I'm going to take you guys to that cathedral you see in the background. It's one of the most fantastic and hugest cathedrals in Europe. And I'm going to make you walk up to the top of one of those towers as well. The same day after we leave Cologne, we will head to the Rhine River, where you will see more castles than you've ever seen in your entire life, because they dot the Rhine River every mile or so. And speaking of castles, the one in the picture, that's Burg Stahleck. It's a 12th century castle, and that is our home for the evening. We'll be sleeping in a castle on our first night in Europe. The next day, after breakfast, we will head to Franconia, and that's a region in Germany, and visit the beautiful medieval walled city of Rothenburg ob der Tauber. One of the many features of visiting that town will be, after dinner, a walk with the famous night watchman of Rothenburg, who will take us back to the Middle Ages, when this town was a thriving trading center. And then after we have stayed in Rothenburg one night, we will head to nearby Nuremberg. Nuremberg, we will visit the old town, and also visit some of the newer sites in Nuremberg, which were actually built during the rise of National Socialism in Germany. And specifically, we'll be visiting a museum called the Nazi Documentation Center, which is in the old Nazi Congress Hall. And it's a very interesting, very modern museum that seeks to try to understand how Nazism happened in a country like Germany. It's fascinating. The same day after we leave the Nazi Documentation Center, we will visit the small town of Dachau on the outskirts of Munich. And of course, we'll be visiting the infamous Dachau concentration camp memorial. And this was the first concentration camp opened by the Nazis after they took power. And we'll have a very somber and reflective time in this very important visit. After we've checked into our hotel in Munich, we'll be heading right down to the center and going to the world-famous Hofbrauhaus, which is essentially a giant beer hall but of course it's all ages. It's a restaurant too, and we'll be eating in the massive festival hall on the top floor, and we'll have fun Bavarian entertainment and large portions of awesome German food. We're staying in Munich 2 nights, so on our second full day in Munich, I'm going to take you guys to the Residence Palace. That's just one of the many rooms in the palace that you're seeing on the screen there. And we'll do a historical walking tour of Munich, talking not just about the history of Nazism there, which is a big part of the history there because this is where Nazism originated, but also the more ancient past. I've got an option on this day for those of you who are really into cars, and the BMW Museum is probably one of the most fantastic automobile museums in the world. And so those of you interested in that are going to be heading out to visit the BMW Museum. And the rest of us will do something else at that time. There's lots to do in Munich, so we'll figure that out. After we leave Munich, we'll be heading across the first international border of our trip and visiting the beautiful small town of Salzburg, Austria, the birthplace of Mozart, and a place that's been called the Rome of the North. You'll see why after we visit Rome, but it has to do with all those beautiful domed buildings that you're looking at in the picture. And we'll also go up and visit the fortress, the castle that's up on the hill overlooking Salzburg. When we leave Bled the next day, we will go deep underground again, this time into probably the most spectacular caves I've ever seen. I visited lots, and these are the Skokjan caves, and there's a huge amount of variety in our hour-and-a-half walk through these caves with a guide. Some gigantic caverns with rushing rivers underneath them, and some smaller kind of cave rooms with really interesting stalactites and stalagmites. And that day will end up in Italy. So Slovenia borders Italy. We'll be crossing over the border and visiting one of my favorite places in the world, Venice. I think it's the most unique city in the world. There are no cars in Venice at all. You get around by walking or by boat. In Venice, on the first full day, we have 3 nights in Venice. The first full day we'll be visiting the Doge's Palace and the St. Mark's Basilica right beside it, right on St. Mark's Square. And I'll be doing a historical walking tour through some of the well-known and very much lesser-known parts of Venice. The story of Venice is one of the most fascinating stories in history, where this island city came from, and how it survived 1,000 years as a powerful republic, basically a country in its own right. And we will be also in the afternoon getting to take a traditional form of transportation, gondola. So we'll be going in small groups on these gondola rides down some of the quieter canals of Venice. And tonight, as every night in Italy, we'll be eating like kings and queens. I don't know, just amazing food experiences that we're going to have. And one of the ones I think is a very popular one with the students is the pizzeria that we go to in Venice. It's just fantastic, and you'll see when you're there. Our final day in Venice will be spent in the lagoon, basically. So Venice is in a lagoon. The city of Venice itself is a series of islands connected by bridges, but there are a whole bunch of other islands in the lagoon with really interesting architecture and history and scenery. And so we're going to all get Vaporetto passes. That's the water bus. And in our smaller groups, we'll be going out and adventuring through different islands: Burano, Murano, Torcello, and there are others as well. And we'll kind of have a small group exploration day, and that's always a lot of fun. And there's a couple of the features from some of the smaller islands that we'll be going to. The one on the left, very famous for glass blowing. You'll get to see how the craftsmen make glass objects on the island of Murano. And then on the right, that's the island, the kind of pastel painted houses and the Leaning Tower. It leans actually more than the Leaning Tower of Pisa, of the small island of Burano. On Saturday, we will meet up with our driver Bart again, who we won't have seen for several days. And he will drive us across the top of northern Italy, and we'll make a stop for lunch and visits in a real foodie town, Parma, Italy. Parma is famous for Parmesan cheese and Parma ham. And it's not really popular tourist destination, but it has some really amazing sites. So I'm going to take you to those much less crowded sites, and you're looking at some of them there: the church and baptistry and tower in the main square in Parma. When you go inside them, you're just amazed at the artistry inside those buildings. Our final destination that day is the small seaside resort town of Levanto, and we'll be arriving later in the afternoon. If we have time, we'll probably go for a small optional hike before dinner. Dinner is going to be big. We're going to be eating at my favorite restaurant, Moresco, and our host Roberto loves us and loves that we fill his restaurant completely full 2 nights every year, and so we'll be having a feast tonight in Levanto. Our full day in the Cinque Terre region will feature some hiking and some trains, local trains connecting little villages. Cinque Terre is essentially 5 villages along this one kind of beautiful area of the seaside in Liguria. That's the province of Italy that it's in. That town you're looking at there is Vernazza, and it has some of the best gelato in the world. And so we're going to just explore the region on Sunday. That's Manarola, as the sun is starting to set, one of the 5 villages. And of course, after all that hiking, you, like my son Jude, pictured there, deserve a nice big gelato. And they, like I say, they make some fantastic gelato all over Italy, but in the Cinque Terre, it just is so fresh. And you're getting limone, that's my favorite, lemon. The lemons are grown right there. Nothing fresher than that. And nothing more refreshing after a big hike than a nice limone gelato. At the end of the day, we'll be back in Levanto, and if the weather's okay, some of you might want to dip your feet in the Mediterranean. That's some of our kids, I think, from last year or maybe 2 years ago, as the sun is setting. The locals at this time of year in March are still wearing fur coats and woolen hats, and they stand up on the on the boardwalk looking down at us insane Canadians. But the water's not particularly warm in March, but yeah, I guess we're Canadian, eh? So after we leave Levanto, we will head straight to Pisa, and we're going to spend a few hours in Pisa at the Campo dei Miracoli, the Field of Miracles. All these buildings standing there. It's a miracle that they're all still standing, really. And you're going to see, that picture doesn't really do it justice, the massive lean of the Leaning Tower, and you're going to get to see it up close and personal, because I will secure tickets for us to go to the top. Those aren't easy to get, but we'll go in small groups with a guide up the crooked steps of that bell tower, and that's one of the most unique experiences in the world, I think, climbing that tower. And you get a beautiful view out there, and we'll have lunch in Pisa as well. And then at in the late afternoon, after we visited Pisa, we'll end up in the city of Florence, and there probably won't be snow. That's a pretty rare picture there, with a dusting of snow in Florence. But in March, there won't be snow. It'll probably be nice and warm, and you'll be wearing your t-shirts. But yeah, we'll actually on the first day see the big dome in the picture. I'm going to be teaching you guys about that in the Renaissance unit. We're going to go climb to the top of that dome. There's lots of climbing stairs on this trip, and you get this huge, beautiful view over the whole city. The core of the city has essentially remained the same for 500 years, and we're staying right in the historic core of Florence. Florence made a name for itself during the Renaissance. It's really where the Renaissance began, and therefore where the origins of the modern world began, in Florence. And there was just this explosion of new ideas and art and science and politics that came out of Florence 500 years ago. Of course, one of the most famous Florentines is Michelangelo, and he created the most famous sculpture, I think, in the world, the David. And we'll be seeing that in the Accademia. The picture there is actually just a replica out in one of the squares in Florence. But when you see the actual David, it's a massive statue, 17 feet tall, in the Accademia gallery. The way it's presented there, it is one of the most amazing experiences, artistic experiences, I guess, that I think you can have. I'll take you on a historic walking tour of Florence, talking about mostly the Renaissance and how the ideas that shaped the Florentine Republic 500 years ago went on to change the entire world. Our last trip with Bart, our driver, will be down to Rome, Italy, just a couple hours south of Florence. And on our first day there, after we check into our lovely hotel, we will visit ancient Rome. And so, of course, you're not going to visit ancient Rome without getting into the Colosseum. And so we will visit the Colosseum, also the Roman Forum. And then we'll head over the Palatine Hill and to this building called the Pantheon. It is the most intact building from the ancient world, and it had a great influence on the things that happened in Florence, actually, during the Renaissance, and I'll explain all of that to you. But this building, with its massive oculus, that's the hole in the ceiling that lets the light shine in, will astound you. And it's actually one of the it was originally built as a temple to all the gods, Pan, all Theon gods, but when the Roman Empire Christianized, they knocked down a lot of their old temples, but this one was too beautiful to knock down. So they just took out all the statues of Venus and Mars and stuff, put a cross in it, and said, hey, this is a church now. So this is actually one of the oldest active churches in the world. About 1,700 years, this has been a Christian church. People have services there. People have weddings there. It's quite amazing. Our last full day in Europe, we will be visiting Baroque Rome. So we're going to head to the Vatican, the smallest country in the world, and maybe walk down those stairs or up those stairs that were designed by Michelangelo, and visit the Vatican Museums, which is one of the greatest storehouses of art and history in the Western world. And no visit to the Vatican would be complete without a visit to the largest church in the Christian world, St. Peter's Basilica. So that dome way in the background there is enormous, unbelievably huge dome over an unbelievably huge building. The dome, of course, was also engineered by Michelangelo. And right beside the St. Peter's, there's a small building that is the Sistine Chapel. And of course, we'll have a visit there too. And we'll get to see the famous ceiling painted by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. The rest of the day in Rome after lunch, we'll be exploring some of the really beautiful outdoor sites like the Spanish Steps, and this is the Trevi Fountain. Famously, if you toss a coin into the fountain, you will be guaranteed a return trip to Rome at some point in your life, and it's worked for me. So, and tonight we'll have our final big feast in one of our favorite restaurants in Rome, and celebrate our grand tour of Europe, and then pack our bags. Because on Friday, we're heading back to Langley, to our farms. We all live in farms, right? And see our goats or whatever. The flight back will be from Rome to Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt to Vancouver. We usually arrive home around 2:30 in the afternoon on that day. So a couple notes about the trip. The budget is always an estimate at the start, but I'm really good at estimating it. So it's always very close to what I've estimated, but it's all just projected costs right now for flights and other things. So the price for Europe 2021 will be $42.90. And that includes everything, all transportation, accommodations, meals, entrance tickets, travel and medical insurance, etc. You don't need any other money. There aren't any excursions where we're going to say, well, you can go if you have money for this, or that's how a lot of travel companies work. But we don't do that with our trips. We just have everything included. And there is a possibility to do fundraising. The calendar's a popular fundraiser, students make a lot of money on that, those that participate in it. All fundraisers are voluntary, meaning that you don't have to participate in them, but only the students who participate in fundraisers benefit from them financially, of course. If you're interested in sponsoring a fundraiser, hold off on it until we have a green light from the district for this trip, but you would contact Mr. Johnson with your idea and take it from there. So usually we'd all be meeting in my classroom right now, and we'd have all these paper applications for you to take home. We're not doing that right now, of course. Eventually we will. But just so you know, handing in an application, or what we're going to do for this one right now is filling out a statement of interest, is not a guarantee of placement on the trip. So students should have already demonstrated an interest in history and culture. And I'm their social studies teacher, so I can see that, basically, should have already demonstrated that they are respectful and trustworthy. And I get input on that from other grade 8 teachers, as well as Mr. Powell and Mr. Moore, and be able to miss up to 3 days of school and do the required work to stay ahead and catch up. So at this time, we're only taking statements of interest. This will be online. I'll have sent a link to you. And please fill that out by May 22nd if you have a serious interest in going on this trip, if the trip gets approval by the district. Of course, they can't approve it right now because of the situation, but hoping that things move in a progressive forward manner. Eventually, we will get the green light from the district, and at that time we'll be asking for deposits and setting up a payment schedule for the trip. You don't pay the whole amount all up front or anything. There's a payment schedule. Just so you know, after May 22nd, when I've looked at this, how many people I have who have stated interest in coming on the trip, if there's space, that space will be open to grade 9 students from this year who didn't get to go on the trip because it was canceled. So this is still essentially a grade 9 trip. I've thought of other ways to, create a trip for those students who missed their trip. But one of the ways I thought of is if there's extra space, then I would open it up to them. And some of them have already asked me about that, actually quite a few. So I first want to see, from my current grade 8s who's interested, and then take it from there. So May 22nd, please. That's Friday next week. Usually in this meeting, Mr. Johnson and I would, after this brief presentation, field quite a few questions. If you have questions that aren't answered in my frequently asked questions section here, just email me. That's fine. I'll get back to you right away. I seem to be online all the time right now. So one of the questions we get, how does rooming work? So we stay in a combination of hotels and very nice hostels. And so with the rooming, parents only room with other parents, same gender. Students only room with other students, same gender. Parents once in a while might get a single room if they luck out, but students never have a single room. They're always rooming with at least one other student. All the rooming arrangements are made prior to the trip with input from students and parents. So, Mr. Johnson, who does an awesome job figuring out this pretty complex puzzle of rooming for all these people for all these nights. He takes input from you guys to see, okay, well, this is the person. If I'm rooming, I prefer to room with this person or these people. And we figure it out much before the trip. So it's already set when we leave. Oh yeah, we get a lot of questions about money. First of all, we're only in the Eurozone, which is great. So there's only one currency through all those different countries. And students don't have to bring any money. But, most students want to buy snacks sometimes and have some discretionary money for souvenirs and such. So I'd say between 100 and 200 is lots. And you can also send a student with a bank card, as long as it's linked to a checking account. They can take euros out of the bank machine there. Your bank just calculates an exchange rate and tax on another couple percent or something. And anyway, that's not the way. You shouldn't be relying on that, though. You should always have some cash to start off with, because it's not always convenient to find a ATM, when you need it right away. Who looks after students' passports? Students do. Every student is required to get a money belt. This is a very thin pouch, basically, that you keep your passport and your money in, and you wear it under your shirts and pants. Basically, it's just worn around your waist. and nobody can see it, nobody can steal it, and if you wear it in the way that we are telling you, you won't lose your passport. The only 2 kids who have ever lost their passports were not wearing their money belt. And that's out of like 1,000, only 2. So yeah, if you do what we say, you'll be fine. What about food? Some of you probably know that I also run a European tour company in the summers, and that company is called Eat and Drink Like a European. So we actually eat for a student trip, we eat really well, and we go to some really fantastic restaurants, and we eat local regional cuisine. I'll never, I want you guys to be adventurous. If it's like, well, I've never eaten anything like this before. Okay, well, let's give it a try. But at the same time, nobody's gonna have to eat some bizarre thing that, like, anyway, I'm not sure what bizarre would be to you, but it's just all really good food that we have on the trip, and we certainly, as a group anyway, aren't going to be, having meals at McDonald's or Subway or something like that. Those chains do exist over there, but maybe in your small groups, when we break for lunch sometimes and go in small groups with a couple parent chaperones supervising a small group of kids, then that could be an option. Then if you want something, I don't know, more North American. Also, if you have any allergies or food restrictions, you need to note those on the statement of interest, please. It's very important that I know that stuff up front. Some of the meals that we plan, I am in contact with the chef at the restaurant a couple weeks before the trip when he knows the menu, because most of these restaurants have a revolving menu based on what's in season, and so when I give that to them, they want to know that up front. If you're a vegetarian, if you have if you're allergic to a certain food, I need to know that stuff. Do students get free time? I always seem to get that question from a student during the meeting. Depends how you define free time. The short answer is no. There's not any time where students are just set free in a city in Europe and said, meet back here in 3 hours. No, that doesn't happen. However, there are several times where we split into smaller groups of 5, 6, 7, 8 students, depending. And these groups are made with student input. And then each of those groups will have usually at least 2 parent chaperones with them. And given some parameters, for getting lunch or something, we give the parents the money for the lunch, and then you guys go find lunch within a certain area of the town and maybe do a bit of souvenir shopping, etc. After dinner, we usually eat dinner European style fairly late, and so we're usually back in the hotel after dinner 8:39, getting close to 10 sometimes, and sometimes after dinner is simply, that's it, curfew's met, and we're, everybody to their rooms, and we have the parent chaperones help us do room checks. Sometimes we do have a little bit of downtime in the evening, and within the hostel or hotel common areas, the students are welcome to hang out and, socialize and play games and whatever. But yeah, there is no time where students are just kind of set free for hours or the day or something. That's not a thing we do on this trip. Okay, well, final words. I wish we were doing this meeting the normal way, all in my classroom, and I probably would have had more questions than the ones I just answered. But anyway, please feel free to email me if you have any questions. And please sign up by Friday, May 22nd with your statement of interest. That's non-binding. If you do sign up and then things change later, the trip gets green lighted, I ask for a deposit, and you say, actually, we can't do it now, for some reason, then that's fine. But if you're interested, please do sign up by May 22nd. And as I said, the day after that, I'm going to open it up to the kids who missed their trip this year. And the trip then might fill up.